O'Neill's name came up on our list and we got to talking about it, and Liam was very gracious in working with us to get him out here. Liam, as Dave mentioned, he's a legendary woodturner. He was the inventor of the Irish grind, and he's going to talk to us today about lidded boxes. So with no further hesitation, Liam O'Neill.
Thank you. Now, there's two things I'm going to talk about before lidded boxes. Lidded boxes is the main event, if you like. My main claim to fame is actually as a maker of bowls. I started turning in 1968 as an apprentice woodturner, and I got the job not because my father did it or because I ever wanted to be a woodturner. I just got a job. I didn't know what woodturning was. I'd never seen a lathe. Well, if I had, I didn't recognize it. And when I saw a piece of round wood, like in a chair leg, I thought somebody had whittled it, you know. And so I just got the job. Imagine that, getting a job as a woodturner without knowing what the heck it was. That is absolutely the truth.
At the ripe old age of
19. 68, 19, 49, work it out, 65. Last year I was saying to everyone, now I know what the Beatles were singing about. Dave was saying about the Irish grind. I am actually the one who introduced it to this country, and Ellsworth was the first to take it up. And he did change it to suit you know, his own requirements, and he has always credited me with it. So if you look on my website, there's a testimonial on there from him crediting me as being the author of the grind. And the funny thing is, I never intended that the Irish grind would become the only gouge that people would use. It was always meant to be just another tool in your arsenal. And what has happened is that I go into a workshop. I've been doing workshops all over through North Carolina and Virginia. And you go into somebody's workshop and there isn't a fingernail ground gouge to be found, a normal gouge. There isn't one to be found anywhere. Everybody's using Irish grinds. And what Dave says is quite correct. I'm not saying go back from the Irish grind. I'm just saying that you should not give up using your regular gouge. Now, if I was doing a bowl demonstration tonight, I would illustrate that, but you're just going to have me back. So and we'll do bowls. The other thing I want to show you tonight is something that you'll have heard about, I'm sure, is that I turn with a chainsaw on a lathe. And I don't actually stand there with a live chainsaw and the lathe's flying around and I'm going, you know. There's all these funny visions of how it's done. So I'm going to show you a slide presentation tonight of how I do very, very large outdoor pieces. I do pieces that are up to 7 feet tall and 3 feet diameter. And I'm going to show you, first I'll show you how I do it, and then a few examples. And then I'll go on then to the lidded box. There's 35 slides in this little presentation. So I'll just sit here at my merry computer and talk through all of these pieces. And hopefully everything will work out. Because me and computers, you take a log, now this is a small one, okay? You take a log, you roll it along the yard, what the heck, yeah, you put a big faceplate on it like that, and you find center by using a roofer's square, and then you use 4-inch, in this case 4-inch lag screws. And they're driven in with an air wrench. I pre-drilled, which is why you see the drill with the bit in the background. And this one has 8 screws, 8 4-inch lag screws will hold that log. If I was doing one of my big chairs, I'd probably have 24 6-inch lag screws. And I have a 16-inch faceplate for those bigger pieces. And when I have the faceplate on, if there's any bits sticking out, I just cut them off, just to round it down a bit. And then I put a strap around it, and I haul it up. And I built that steel gantry myself. And you can see the lathe there in the background. My lathe that I use for this purpose is built of mass concrete poured into a big box. And you can see the spindle sticking out there with a bit of green plastic around it to stop grease, to stop dirt getting into the bearings, because it's two flange bearings which are kind of open in the front. And by the way, don't be shy, ask questions, alright? Make a sound, quick. That's good. Just thought you were going to sleep. Right. Now, there's the flange bearing, and the shaft is about 2.5 inches. It's 65 mil, I think, which is nearly 3 inches. But anyway. And you just line up the faceplate, and remember it's held up with the chain hoist. And there we have the vision of the whole thing. You can see the headstock. On the right, the piece being put on. What I do is I slip the belt and just turn the pulley to screw in the spindle into the faceplate. The motor on the left was originally used on a fishing boat to haul in 3-mile long nets. So it's quite a motor. Now, in fact, I do very, very little with the motor. Sometimes that motor could go 2 years without being turned on. It really only is ever done under power in extreme circumstances, which I won't go into because it will take all night to explain. Anyway, what I use for turning these big pieces is a chainsaw. It's a Stihl E220, and it's the only saw that I use simply because I can get that with a 16 or 18 inch bar and chain. And then I can take off that and put on a regular Stihl 24 inch or 30 inch or even a 36 inch chain. And because I'm only ever cutting a short distance at the tip, if you put a 3-foot bar on an electric chainsaw, it won't kill it because it's only driving the chain and 6 inches of a cut, so it's not going to kill it. The very funny story about the first time I decided to try to put the 3-foot bar on. I called my steel dealer and I said, would you order me a 3-foot bar for my bar and chain for my chainsaw? I said, with the narrow slit, not the bigger slit now, the narrow one for the smaller saw. And he said, sure. And then about a week later he called me and he says, your 3-foot bar is in. So I said, right, I'm sending in my wife with the chainsaw for you to fit it, because longer chains, I don't know if you know this, but you're better off when you buy a chain, take the saw and bar into the dealer and get him to fit the chain, because there'll always be a link or two out. So my wife left anyway with the electric saw, and about 45 minutes later the phone rang. And the guy's on the end of the phone and he says, there's a woman here and she says that I'm to put the 3-foot bar on the electric chainsaw. And I said, yep. Are you mad? Yep. No, I said, it's okay, go ahead, put it on. I said, I'm only using 6 inches at a time, you know, so, you know, I explained, so it was all right, but it was just funny. Now, you see what I've done is, the T-rest, which is instead of the tool rest, which stands in the banjo of the lathe, has 2 holes in it, and there's 2 holes drilled in the bar of the saw. And there's 2 ordinary coach bolts with the shoulders ground off so that the heads sit flat against the blade, against the bar. And then you just tighten up the whole lot. And that's looking at it from the end. You can see that there's an angular piece of wood, and the angular piece of wood turns the saw directly into the piece of wood on the lathe as it turns. And I tie the trigger with a piece of something or other, sometimes string, but tie the trigger because you need your 2 hands free. And then I start working. and the saw is turned in at an angle to the wood, and the wood is just turned around with my hand, and because it's in balance, it's very easy. At no time is the saw out of control. It's always strictly controlled. And you turn around the wood onto the saw very slowly and take a little bit at a time. You'll be absolutely amazed how fast this will remove wood. And if you go on my website, on the International Workshops page, you'll see some still photographs of me using this system. When I'm demonstrating it on the road, I demonstrate it on either a Powermatic or a big jet or a big one-way, any of the bigger lathes. And it's actually good technology. Like, you can use it for removing the waste off a very big heavy lump that you might decide that you wanted to round down. You can do it with that. That's turning the outside, and then you end up with a fairly rough looking piece of wood like that. And then I decide where the bottom is, and that's what I'm doing right there. And then that's a close up. You can see I'm cutting with the full width of the chain. And it's a regular chain, it's not sharpened any special way, it's just a regular chain. And then when you turn the outside like I just did, you get all these little ridges up and down. And what you do then is you put the edge of the chain against the top of the ridge. So that, like, if that's the ridge, you balance it across it like that. That's an exaggeration, but you see what I'm getting at. And then you turn the piece of wood backwards so that it's trailing on the saw. And you get the most beautiful little fine cut. And I'm going to show you some pieces later that are, you can get some amazing effects with the chainsaw.
Instead of turning, I want to understand this, Liam. Instead of turning the blank down onto the saw, you're actually rotating it up. Past.
Exactly. If you ever look
on the top of the chain as you're
it's cutting from the back.
cutting from the back.
But you have it angled so that it's cutting.
There's an angle, yeah. There's an angle built in. What you do is you know the piece. Well, I was turning with the wood coming down on the chain, right? So all I do is rotate it backwards. And you'd be surprised, because the tooth has that sort of circular throat, there's actually a certain amount you can take off from the back. And it's very fine. It's how you get your fine cuts. And that's the sort of curve you can get. I mean, you can get a much tighter, smaller curve than that, but you can see that that's a good curve.
And what kind of wood is that?
Redwood.
Redwood?
Grew in Ireland. We have redwood for about 160, 70 years now. It's the same that grows in California. They grow well in Ireland, so. And there I am just setting the width of the rim. And then I plunge cut. I take a series of plunge cuts into the top like that. Now, if you imagine some of my bigger pieces, like the big chairs, I'm plunge cutting with a 4-foot bar into it. So I'll go 4 feet into some of them with a 4-foot bar. And it's much easier if you remove a big core out of the middle. Now the core doesn't come out in one piece, it comes out in any way you can. You just lump it out, and chop it out and butcher it and whatever. And I don't know why I show you the slide of the hole, but there you are. It's a hole. And then, because there's going to be an opening in the side of the piece, I can cut in from the side, and you can see there's a couple of places where I cut in, plunged in from the side with a much smaller saw, and that bit that was cored would fall out then in pieces. And then I start on the inside, and what I do when I get to the point where the rim of the bowl is touching the tool rest, the pillar of the banjo, is I put on a longer chain, and then a longer chain, and then I have a wood piece that goes on that will extend the saw. You can extend the saw with a piece of wood. You'd have to think about it. I'd have to have paper and a pen and blackboard and chalk and stuff, and I haven't got it. So anyway, you can get down inside a 6 or 8 foot piece. And when you get to the end of the bottom, the nose of the saw has to be slightly below center, because the top of the chain, if that is doing the cutting, you're going to have it trying to kick. whereas if you cut with the bottom, it will be kind. And then you push it in to the centre, set the depth, and then you end up with a series of, you can see those coves, series of coves where I set it along. And just going back there, you can see I have a pencil line on the side of the opening, and that gives me the width. And you can see further back up on the left of the opening, you can see that there are ridges. But in fact, if you use a flap disc, you can sand out those. With not much practice, you can sand those out fairly easily. And then I use the same technique again for removing those ridges. I let the saw, the roundness of the nose of the saw touch against the top of the ridge, and then rotate it so that it's trailing again. And then I use, these are the flat discs I use for sanding, inside or out. And just sand them down like that. And then I finish making my tenon. And you can see the black holes where you're near the tips of the screws. And you know that redwood has that same thing as oak. It blackens metal, or metal blackens it, you know, there's that reaction. And that's a base that I'm making for another piece, but I make a lot of the bases are turned, and I just drill a hole in the top, and the tenon that's on the bottom, you just cut off that extra piece and drop the tenon down and put in a couple of screws, blind boring and covering the heads of the screws. Now, a lot of my pieces that I do for outside, done out of redwood, are actually sandblasted. There's a guy down the road from me, and he's a monumental sculptor, and he sandblasts them for me. This one is, I'm blackening it with a blowtorch, and any softwood, you can quite easily blacken it with any kind of a blowtorch. You can use the one that you use for felting a roof, you know, those bigger ones. I use the bigger one actually at home, the roofers, the big one, because they covers a big area fast. But in this case I was just doing it for the camera. I used a small one, and it's just a little plumber's blowtorch. And when you blacken, when you burn the wood, the winter wood, the grain lines, they stand proud, and the soft summer wood in between burns away. And then when you rub it off, the best thing to rub out the ash is green Scotch Brite. No, I wouldn't go any stronger than green, because you'll start getting scratch marks in the black area. And some people say, you know, why don't you use a wire brush? Same reason, leave scratch marks. So soft Scotch Brite or very, very coarse steel wool would do it as well. And then I finish them with Danish oil. Now, a lot of the vessels that I turn for outdoors are sculpted by cutting away sections, and they represent a figure or a saying, or just a lot of the early ones I did were just hollow vessels, you know, natural edge hollow vessels. This one is called Treasure, and it's a figure holding something precious, and it's obviously abstract. And you can see the bottom, you can see the plinth, how it was burned and then rubbed. And so that's kind of typical of my outdoor pieces that I do with that technique. Now, the interesting thing was that when I started doing them with the for outdoor work, I also started doing very large indoor work using the same technique. You know, pieces for indoor display, and I'll show you a few of those. Now, this is actually 5 chairs in a circle, and they were made from the redwood tree, the stump of which you can see in the background. And the one on the left at the back is the tallest, and it's 7 feet. So, and they're all turned on that concrete lathe using the chainsaw. And something that I really don't understand is why people are so afraid of this. I've been doing this since 1998. Well, I've been doing it earlier, but that's when I came out public with them and did my first exhibition. And in 2000 I brought one over here and showed it at a couple of events, all the great turners were there and everybody was there and they just didn't want to know. They just, I don't know, for some reason, nobody wants to know. That's very strange.
How many people have a concrete lathe?
Well, anyone can have a concrete lathe. How much is concrete?
Cement truck drivers.
Anyway, next September I'm going to come over here to a museum in Davenport, Iowa, and I'm going to build a concrete lathe on a plaza outside the museum and make a couple of these chairs.
Wow.
And
So how did you come up with doing this, Liam? I mean, did you just have a dream one night? Hey, you know, I think I can take a chainsaw.
A lot of Irish beer.
You know, yeah, too much stout that night. Or
White Lightning.
White lightning.
We have a version of that called Pucheen. No, it was a series of things happened. The first thing that happened was the reason I started coming to this country was in 1984 I got a scholarship to travel over here. And I was travelling around and I met Moulthrop and Lindquist and Ellsworth and Nish and all the great Stocksdale, every one of them. I saw them all. Anyway, two things happened on that trip. The first was that when I went to Lindquist's place, he showed me his workshop and he had a chainsaw attached to his lathe for decorating his pieces. He used it for decorating his pieces. And so and he had the two holes in the just like I did there, right? And the angle and the whole lot. So, and he talked about the coming down at the back angle, you know, the trailing action. So that's where I got that. Then, when I was down in Moulthrop's, one evening there was a huge thunderstorm and rain falling and it was dark night. And you know, Moulthrop was famous for making these great big globes, 3-4 foot diameter. And one of them had gone wrong. And it had all the tool marks on the outside, and he had put it outside in his garden in the patio up on a wooden plinth. And the rain was coming down on this thing, and I looked at it and I said, that looks fantastic out there. Why does nobody do that, you know? And thought no more about it. So those two ideas, you know, from that trip. And then a number of years later, I was in Germany doing a commission for a guy, and he wanted a 24-inch diameter hollow vessel made out of a big ash hollow log, which had loads of birds and rocks and everything in it, you know. So I chucked it up on a borrowed in a borrowed workshop. We chucked it up on a lathe, and I brought my Irish grinds and my English grinds and my Scotch grinds. Nothing would cut it. Nothing. No tool would. It was just too hard and full of grit. And so I remembered Lindquist and the chainsaw attached to the lathe. So I set up a rig with an electric push-along forklift truck, and I attached the chainsaw to the bar of that, and eventually managed to, in 4 days, I managed to make this hollow vessel. And that was the first time I used the technology. And it was very rough and very ready and all the rest of it. And that was that. I didn't think any more about it. Then another thing that happened was that I was watching a slideshow once in Utah by a man called Jack Straka, who's from Hawaii, very famous in the 80s and 90s. And you'll see his work in some of the books and all. Well, Jack showed slides of his lathe, and it was a concrete lathe. So you can see that all the ideas just came together, right? Now, the catalyst for actually making them, that's probably the most important thing, was that I was asked to do an exhibition in a park in Dublin. Now, they wanted me to do it indoors in an exhibition space, but I said, look, this is the biggest park in Europe, and I have wood from the park, lots of different big lumps of wood. So I said, right, this is it, I'm going to do the outside pieces. So it was such a big deal that I had to form a committee. So we had a fundraiser and a publicist and a project manager and a curator, and you know, and we got loads of sponsorship and government money and all kinds of things, and we made 14 pieces, and that was the first time in history that anybody made a big body of outdoor work. And to this day, I cannot understand how nobody else has taken it up. It doesn't make sense. I just don't know. Why would nobody else do this? Crazy. Maybe I'm crazy.
We won't go there.
I have made lots of money from these pieces. You can get a good, you know, because they're big sculptures. You know.
Yeah.
This is an example of a piece that's done with the chainsaw, and this was the root system of a yew tree. And so the trunk of the tree is the stem of the vessel, and the roots are the top, the spread out, flared area at the top. And there was lots of rocks and stones and all kinds of glass and metal and everything in it. But that shows you the sort of thing you can do. Now the piece is hollow all the way out to the bottom, so the pit doesn't matter.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yew's really a toxic wood, is it not? Did you take real precautions when you...
No, the wood isn't toxic, it's the leaves and the berries that are
The
toxic.
leaves and the berries that are toxic,
Yeah.
but the wood's okay to turn?
Wood's okay, yeah. Now when you're sanding it, you wear a mask like you would with any wood, so.
How big is that, ma'am, that piece?
That particular one is not the biggest I've ever done. It's about 3 feet high and about 24 inches across. The biggest of those that I've done is more like 5 feet high and 3 feet across the top. So, and it's just a question, once you get them on the lathe, they are like, you have all those sort of bits sticking out. Once the chainsaw is set and you turn it around, you get all those pieces evenly cut. It's easy. It really is easy. Nobody will accept that, but it is easy.
When you're chinning, what are you using, like full chisel tooth or semi-chisel?
Just a regular. I'll show you in a minute.
Okay.
What do you do about those rocks that you're, and glass and stuff you're talking about?
You'd be surprised how good a chain is at cutting rocks.
I never tried that.
It's pretty good at dulling it too.
I tell you, one thing I found out, you know the way when your chain needs sharpening, you have 2 choices. One, you can sharpen it by pushing the little file through, or you can take it to somebody else to sharpen. Now, when you take it to the guy who sharpens it, he has a little machine with a round wheel, a little 4.5-inch pink disc. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
Buy yourself a 4.5-inch pink disc, stick it in an angle grinder, and grind them by hand. Hold the bar in a bench vise so that the chain can flow through. You won't have to take the chain off.
Yeah.
You just mark one tooth and start there, and just carefully take the same amount each time, which is what you would do with a hand file. You know, like a 4.5-inch wheel, the pink wheel, it costs about, I don't know, $8. And it saves you an enormous amount of time. And so I found that rocks aren't the worst. The worst is bits of glass. Even, you know, you find old horseshoes and things, like you find them after you've cut them. But sometimes they don't actually damage the tooth, they just kind of blunt it a bit, you know, unless you meet something with very hard metal. But most old stuff like that, okay, you have to diary in a bit of time for grinding.
How about the carbide tip chains like the...
They are the worst invention of all time. They're a pain in the butt. You know why? Because what happens is they get very subtly blunt from hitting rocks, right? And you try sharpening one of those suckers. Take my word for it, they're not worth the powder to blow them up. I bought one once and never again. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Now that's a nice piece of Irish yew, and the log was sitting outside for a long time, and you can see that the bark edge, the bark had fallen off, but the natural skin has gone grey. And then you can see that the 2 cut ends, and they had gone grey as well from being out in the air. So I simply turned the vessel using the chainsaw. This is one of the beautiful things about this technology, and you can get a kind of an idea from the apple. it's about 22 inches, I think, or 23 inches across, and probably about 7-8 inches deep, 8 probably. And it's a crotch piece, so you can imagine the figure that's down in the inside. And it's just something like would be much more difficult to do, but it's when you're doing it with the chainsaw, believe me, it's so easy. And this is a piece of elm burl. And you see the grooves inside and out. See the grooves?
Mm-hmm.
They're all done with running the piece against the chainsaw with the trailing action. And you automatically get all those grooves. You don't even have to think about it. And you can keep turning until you're blue in the face, you'll still get the same number of grooves. And then you just give it a rub of a wire brush and paint on Danish oil. Job done. Now I like to put a little bit in the very bottom of the inside. I make a little piece, a little bowl within a bowl, and I sand it very smooth, just to prove I'm not a lazy son of a bitch. And the bark is on the edge, so there's quite a bit of CA glue used in that there. I think that's it. Yep, that's it. So I thought you might like to see that.
So how many hours you spend on making one of those chairs in that group of?
How many days, weeks?
Yeah.
They vary. Sometimes they flow very well and it just sort of goes, goes well. And some other times then nothing goes right. And, it just varies. The worst, most of the ones that I do nowadays are done in redwood, but I've done them in oak quite a few times, and believe me, that's another story. Yeah. The two we're going to do up in Davenport, we're thinking we may use some kind of oak. We don't know yet.
Are you the maker of the world's largest bowl by any
No.
chance? I've seen in an old woodworking magazine, it was like 7 or 8 foot across.
That's a guy, I think it's a guy called Melvin, Stuart Mortimer.
I remember seeing it, but
Yeah.
I had no idea.
No, that's Stuart Mortimer, and I think it's actually made end grain, and it's got kind of a natural edge.
I don't recall,
Yeah.
but I just remember it's huge.
Yeah, it's the biggest diameter. I would say that if you did it, what would you call it? Cubic inches, I'd probably win. Anyway, I'm not in it for the competition, I'm in it for the money.
This
Now,
one, not that one.
what I'm going to talk about this evening is
I just want to make sure you're recording because I don't see it red.
now I have to know, I have no monitor, so I don't know what you're seeing, but this is a piece of redwood burl, and if you try to, you know the way you make boxes, you normally get a straight grain piece of wood, and you cut the piece of wood between centres and you round it down and you decide where you want to put the lid in the body, and you make a step on the body and you fit the lid onto it, and when you bring it together the grain still matches because it's a straight grain piece of wood. What do you do if it's a piece of burl or a piece like this, crotch, or spalted wood like this? There's burl, crotch and spalted, and you get some very, I was in there looking on the, I was drooling over some of the wood in there on the shelves, and you can get the grain matching through from top to bottom. There. You can't maybe see that, but that grain lines, those grain lines are at about 45 degrees, and yet they're matching. And the reason is that when I parted off the lid from the body, I made that gap, and I filled that gap with exactly the same amount of a contrasting wood, and I made the step of that contrasting wood like that. Follow the idea? Okay. You got it? Good. Now, here you can pass that around. Here you go. Now, what I do is, when I get these bits of wood, they're often very wet, and what I do is I round them down between centres, and you can see the grain in the wet piece of wood, and you decide where you want to have your division, and you park them off, and you make your steps, your grip steps for your chuck. Then rough out the inside, leaving maybe a 5/8 or 3/4 inch thick wall. Rough them out, part turn them, both halves, and let them dry. Now, in the case of crotch like this was part turned and left to dry. But when I went back today and took it out of my suitcase over in Dave's house, I discovered that I thought it had some little bit of warping to go. So what I did was I put it in a chuck and returned the grip steps and then caught it in the chuck and took out another little bit out of the inside, right? So you can turn them rough and take out a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 times. And then this piece of black wood is what I'm going to use for matching for the step and for making this the band around the middle. We'll have to invent some kind of a name for that, but anyway. So then what you do then is you get the 2 halves, and what I usually do at home is I sand them flat on a belt sander, and I get my contrasting piece of wood and I sand both sides of that flat on the belt sander, and I glue them up like that. See the way that's just all glued together? Now, the best glue is probably Tight Bond. I glued this one this morning with CA glue. Okay, now apparently CA glue fails after 7 years. Did somebody ever tell you that? Did you ever hear that?
7 to 10 I've heard.
Yeah. Now,
CA glue, super glue.
yeah, it's available in 3 viscosities, as they say. You get the thin, which is what I used. Another thing I did at Dave's house today was, this is very spalted and very soft. So I soaked it with the thin CA glue, and it came right through, look. All the way through. So that's the thinner CA glue. Now I used the thicker one for sticking the bits together. So I'm going to finish the spalted one, but just to show you how I part off this business here. The turning process is that you turn the lid first. You turn the inside of the lid first. And if you have the whole lot stuck together like that, you first round down make sure your lathe is tight. Round down the piece of contrasting wood. Now, I don't round down only about halfway, because this is not through with this. You see that? It doesn't matter, because when I part it off, this will be caught separately. So I just want to part off this black guy, leaving just a little bit of the black attached to the lid. Now there's also quite a bit of wobble in it. It's really warped a good bit from the round. So I get these, throw up this all here, and then now I get a parting tool. I'm going to be passing this around. I don't know whether you can get a close-up of this in the camera, but what we have here is an ordinary, you see that? Well, it should have the same both sides, but I'm a professional and we don't give a rat's about angles. So it's a 1/8 parting tool, and what I did was, you know those grooved parting tools with the groove all the way down the stem? They're a pain in the butt because they chew up your rest. So what you do is you get one of these instead, and you put a groove in one of the facets, one of the sharpened facets. See that? Is it on camera? Okay, and I'll pass it around anyway. And then you use that parting tool, and when you use it, you'll have two very sharp corners here. And you cut it with the groove down. Now I want you all, after I've said 1, 2, 3 together, to say groove down, okay? 1, 2, 3. Groove down. Because if you do it with the groove up, you'll wish that you hadn't. Okay. I see the ring was roughed out as well. I forgot to mention that. Okay, here we are. So then you just keep going, and you can see how far off. That's really thick at one side and really thin at the other. By the way, Irish people can't say thick and thin. They say thick and tin. And 1/3. So we'll just pretend this is the one I really wanted to work on, because I think it's a beautiful piece of wood. And so we'll start by catch that in the chuck. Now normally it would be all sort of off center and rough in here, but because I had to glue it with the CA glue, I had to sort of skim the inside here and take out most of the waste, you know what I'm saying, so that I could put in the CA glue. And so, by the way, you can pass that around there, the groove parting tool. Now, the wood I decided to use to be the contrasting wood is actually cocoa bolo. And I will never again use cocoa bolo for this purpose for two reasons. Number one, the grain is too strong and it distracts. You know, because it's not matching, it will distract. The other reason is that it's like having somebody shove pepper up your nose when you're turning it. Is that interfering with the camera or anything there? No? Okay, so the first thing I do is I have to check that the outer diameter is trued up. So I get the gouge way over on its side. Now this is an ordinary fingernail gouge. So make sure that there's no little rough spots or whatever. So I just make sure I have that cleaned up. So that's done, and then the next thing I do, I take a fresh cut. Even though I cut that off with that parting tool and it's quite clean, it's still going to have little irregularities. So cut it very gently. And throw up that face. Now, important instrument. It's called a very near calipers. So just check the depth. I have a good quarter of an inch in the depth. First thing I do, now that's a fingernail grind, just a regular almost straight across fingernail grind. This is an Irish grind, spindle gouge. This is the first time seen anywhere. No. Don't tell Ellsworth. Now, this is used very much with the long nose and everything. Their left pocket is ring insert. Anyway, you know, for roughing out, you push it in the middle, make a hole and pull sideways to rough out the end grain wood. You also can cut in places like this using a real gentle brushing stroke. Use it like a scraper. Look at all that CA glue coming off. Now I just threw up right in here. Now usually this would be, you know, the wood would be very irregular, so you would have to take a cut with this. In fact, we will. Just push it in the middle like that, and just pull sideways. Making light brushing strokes. And when you're doing the side of the piece, go over on the side so that it's cutting with at a scraping angle. In other words, don't turn it up like that, because if that wood there comes down on that, you'll have a dig in. Okay, so get it over so that it's trailing. And then to clean up the inside, I use a round scraper, round nose scraper. Now, people look at me when they see me with a great big scraper like this inside a small box, but there's a reason. When you're cutting inside a curve, the closer to the curve that your scraper is, without actually being the same, if you know what I mean, the bigger the scraper you can use, the nicer it is, the easier it is to control the curve. It's like when you're doing the bottom of a shallow dish. Don't use a round nose scraper inside a more kind of open curve. Use a square scraper with a slight dome on it, so that it's almost the same curve. I wish I had a piece of paper in that. Anyway. Now another thing is, make sure that the curve of the scraper is perfectly round, that there's no interruptions. If you come around here and you have a little interruption or a little change in direction, then it will replicate itself inside the curve of the box. And it's nearly impossible to get a perfect curve inside a box or inside any curve like that with a scraper. If the same applies to a side scraper that you're, you know, if you're using it on the side of a bowl for shear scraping, if there's any interruption in the scraper, in the curve, any interruption in the curve will replicate itself in the bowl, and you wonder why you're not able to get a good curve.
Are you coming under and then up into the center? Is that what I'm
A little bit in the negative.
Yeah, you kind of do a little bit of up and down till you get it level with center.
Okay.
And it's at a negative rate, it's downward angle, otherwise known as a dangle. Light brushing stroke. And when you come to the side here, you really have to turn it a little bit up on its side. So it's a good idea if you kind of use your fingers like that. Now you see how gently I'm using it. I'm barely The easier and gentler you go, the nicer the cut you get. Now, it's really important that you get an undercut in here. Let me explain. Somebody has the box back there. All right. Has it been around the house?
No.
Anyway, can I just have it for a second? You can have it again. Thank you. Now, back in here, it's undercut, so that when it goes down on the step, it grips firmly right in here on the end of the step. Okay. You don't try to get this here dead parallel to the step. There's no need, first of all. Nobody will ever know. But also, it's nearly impossible. It's too hard. So just automatically undercut. And then you get a positive grip on the inside there. Now this one has gone loose because of changes in humidity. Big changes in humidity. So if everyone hasn't seen it, you can pass it around again, whatever. It's here. So that has to be undercut there. And how you find out if you have an undercut is get any straight edge or a ruler, put it in there about 1/4 of an inch, eyeball it to be parallel with the ways, and look in and see if you have a gap between here and, you know, the inside of the wall. And this is undercut. There is still a nipple in the middle, which I need to get out. I'm also looking out for any little bits of torn grain, although with the CA glue having done its work, there won't be any torn grain. Okay, I'm going to take that. Start sanding, and I start with 120 grit paper. Now the paper I'm using is a carborundum, made by Carborundum, who are Canadian, I believe. But you'll forgive them that, won't you?
Maybe.
Even though they invented the wool cap and several other things which are really stupid looking to know. You know the old joke about the Canadians and the wool caps, no? I don't either. Michael Hosseluk is a Canadian, and look what he did. Some amazing work. I was in Michael Hosseluk's place once. It's like he lives on the biggest snooker table you ever saw. It's flat for miles and miles and miles. Prairie, you know, dead flat. And he comes out with the most amazingly creative work. So we start off there with 120 grit. And I see that there's a few little areas there. Now you try and get the 120 grit to do all the rough work. But if you haven't taken out all the rough stuff with the 120, there's no point trying to take it out with the next one down the line. So we'll have that. 120, and this is 180. There's a stupid joke I tell everywhere I go. It makes people laugh. And it's to do with the next sandpaper. This is 180, right? Now, why does an Irish woman only put 239 beans in her stew? One more would make it 240. I know it's pathetic. laugh every time. Now, I didn't put any 180 or 120 or 180 on the Coco Bolo because it's so hard. If you put that kind of paper on it, all you're going to do is roughen it up. So I just didn't put any sandpaper on that. That's our 240. Next thing I'll have me saying it. This is 320. Now we continue to sand out the Coco Bolo. Any minute now there'll be a big sneeze. 400. And 600. We go down to 600. That's wasted. Now, the finish I use for boxes, and Dave has it in his shop so he can tell you all about it. It's called Triple E. And that doesn't mean triple E, it means E-E-E. Okay, I don't know what it stands for. F in English, Aegis or something like that. Anyway, you put the triple E into the grain of the wood, press it in, make sure you... Now this wood, when I put the CA glue on it this morning, I didn't do a good enough job. There's a couple of softer areas after appearing. But we'll put up with that, it's just a demonstration. So we'll push plenty of the triple E into the wood. Now we'll start off with the lathe running like that, just to press in a good bit into the grain, and then crank it up to top speed. It acts as a grain filler. And then you use a bit of paper towel. It's funny, paper towel seems to work the best of all. Have you found that? Works well. There we go. And that's the inside of the lid. My nose is running from that pesky Coco Bolo, yeah. Oh, the blood. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to fit the lid down onto the body. First thing I'm going to do again, trim off the face. Nice gentle cut. Take my very near calipers and I measure across the width of the inside of the lid. Now, I'm going to actually make a mark on here, but it's not going. I'm not trying to get it exactly like this because that would be very difficult. I'm actually going to widen the calipers ever so slightly and make the mark, but it's only a guide. it's really only a guide. I want to take, now that, inside that little guide scratch that I just made is where the step is going to be. So I want to take off some waste here. You see that mark gives me a fair idea of where I'm going. Next thing I do then is, this is the part that causes me to curse and swear and make loud noises the most. It's where, when you're setting the diameter of a step, take only a little bit on the outside. Oh, you know what I just did?
That'd be small.
What?
That'd be small.
Went too far. Okay, well maybe. I had some kind of a senior moment there and went too far. Oh, by the way, notice I'm holding the end of the tool with my belly button. See that? Otherwise known as your navel. Now, use the light brushing strokes and don't be in a hurry like I was a few minutes ago. The reason I'm taking so long is that I'm deadly afraid I've only got a tiny little bit that I can let's see how we're doing. No, not there yet. What was that? Share the joke, go on.
I said, it sure got quiet in here.
Yeah. There's something very wrong. I'm going to take some of the top off. strange. I really have no idea what's happening here. Nearly there.
Now, the tool, is that just a scraper, or do you call that a bowdan, or what do you call that tool?
It's a 3/8 beating and parting tool. You see it there, it's the same, well, it's supposed to be the same both sides,
But you're a professional.
but we'll pass this around if we ever get finished. Well, I've got it on, but I don't know if it'll stay on. It's kind of trying to spring off. Okay. Okay, pass that around. Hopefully this will be all right. I'm just thinking that, is there a center for this?
Yes, it'd be in one of the two boxes back there.
Okay, now what? The next thing I'm hoping I can do is turn down the two until they're exactly the same diameter. I'm using my belly button again. And the reason I am using my belly button is I'm afraid of my life. Get away without it, because he, after making them poor man go to all the trouble of finding. Now, instead of using the ½ inch, can you see all right what I'm doing?
Hands covering it up.
Is it? Can you see it now? You can't. Okay, well we'll try and do it. See, this lid will hop off. Trying to keep the bevel riding so that it pushes. The bevel is riding in such a way that it actually pushes the lid down back onto the step.
I did put a live center behind you there if you want to bring the tail
Okay.
up.
Yeah. Okay.
And that'll come off. There's a smaller cone underneath.
Okay, let's see now if I can. Trying to get the bevel riding. And take very small cuts.
It's like watching a coffin warping.
Coffin warping?
Yeah. The reason I'm taking my time, so much time, is that I don't want to pull it off the step, because we've so little grip.
Very impressed.
What?
Very impressed that this stayed on through all this. I know if I was doing it, what would happen?
Tell you what, miracles will never cease. I just want to try and get a little bit of a point on the end there. Okay, little point on the end. And then I proceed to shape the outside of the body. Now, that little beading and parting to it, wherever it's gone. Did you ever notice that no matter how much, if you bring two very square corners together, no matter how close they are, you'll always feel the corner. In other words, if you make a box and the lid and the body come together, those corners, if they're left sharp, there'll always be a little movement and you'll always notice the difference. So, by the way, there's something not right here with the... Okay, that's better. The two corners where they come together, I like to put a little chamfer on them. And the reason is that you won't feel the corners when they come together. Did I make sense with that statement? You all know what I mean? Okay. Right, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sand the outside, finish the outside of the body. So we start off with the 120 again. When the club gets a bit better off, you might get yourselves a dust extractor, because there was a dust extractor just there right now for demonstrators. I'd say they'd appreciate it.
Just got to get Neil to run the dust collecting tube out from the back.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's the 120. This is 180. Too farty. $3.20. $400. And 600. I don't know what that is. Oh, 600 from the last one. We get our triple E. This is a really, really dramatic spalted piece of wood. Am I getting the snipples from the sniffles from Cocobolo? I'm getting the Cocobolo sniffles. Right. Crank it up to the top. I use the triple E, and I think I just realised something. I also use shallow wax cream, and I'm pretty sure I forgot to do that on the inside of the lid, right? Yeah, be alright. The shallow wax cream helps to cut down even further the smoothness of the Triple E. Now, oh, that feels good. And that's the lid. Now the next thing we do is finish the inside. And it's exactly the same as we did with the outside. Is that in the way of the camera or anything? Okay. Not quite where I want to go. Oh. Okay. Now. Don't turn it that fast. I start off by using this, as I was saying before, like a scraper. Very gently. Very far over on this side. So that is scraped with the bottom edge here. There. And then I use the round nose scraper. Get it up on the side and get it up the side of the box. So over on its side, tipped up, we're doing down there. Moving very gently, light brushing strokes. And then back down on the flat when you're further down in the piece. I'm trying to get a nice curve starting in the middle of the bottom and coming all the way up. By the way, when you're using a scraper like this, always keep your hand in contact with the rest and your fingertips holding it like that. You can see everything that's going on and you're holding the scraper back because the scraper actually wants to bite in and take more than you want it to take. Now, must be because I haven't had any cappuccino lately. So I'm having a hard time getting the curve right. So I take some light
That's close enough. We'll get away with that. Finish the inside now. Start off with 120 grit.
When you were using the gouges, it looked to me like you were using a bowl gouge on the inside, the spindle gouge on the outside? or
No,
not?
it was 2 spindle gouges, one with a fingernail grind and one with a long. Here you go, pass them down and let everyone have a look, the difference. They're both the same spindle gouge. So we've done our first and rough sanding with the 120. I suggested that you pass that the 2 tools stay together so that everyone you can contrast the difference. It's what I was saying earlier about the bowl gouges, the Irish grind bowl gouges, you know, the deeper fluted ones. The swept back has one function and the ordinary fingernail has another function. The idea that one cancels out the other is not really the case. You need both. So I find it funny that having done me damnedest to convert everyone to Irish grind and now trying to tell them to go back and as well, not instead of, as well. This is the 240. And this is 320. By the way, you notice I'm not revolving the lathe very fast. It's only at about 1100. When you're using sandpaper, if you turn on your machine too fast, sandpaper won't do anything because it's skipping, the grits are skipping over the surface of the wood too fast. You're not giving it a chance to do its work and bite in and take off some wood. So it's just not to sand too fast. And that's 600. And then we'll get our triple E. Good dollop into the inside. A dollop is a great word, isn't it? Now go at slow speed first just to get it into the wood and then crank it up. wax cream. Sometimes I have the impression that the microphone is going in and out a bit. You're
I
right.
hear that too.
Hmm?
I hear it too.
It's underneath your apron a little bit, I think.
Oh yeah. This is the shallow wax cream. Now, I left the lid a bit tight, and the chances are I need to take off another bit. Remember all that nonsense with trying to fit the lid? Well, guess what? We're back. Oh, hang on. Okay. I'm just going to use a little bit of the shallow wax cream in there. Good. All right. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to turn off the bottom of the box. So it's a good idea to see how much you have left in the depth. So use the calipers. And we see that we have loads. Now the trick is to catch this here without marking it. So somebody showed me this. It's drawer liner. You buy it by the yard in Walmart. It's rubberized, and it drawer liner.
He asked for a piece of shop today. He was prepared to, like, what? Finally figured it out.
Anyway, it's kind of rubberized, and it gives a good grip, but it also cushions so that the jaws don't mark the wood. It's a marvelous invention. Now,
I get my shallow gouge. Have a look, see. That ain't bad. Now I want to put a concave in the bottom so that it sits nice and proper on the surface that you sit it on. Gouge over on its side, level writing. very slight little dimple in the bottom. You know, sometimes when you cut end grain off like that, if you cut all the way, the little bit of end grain pulls out at the very end and you're left with a hole. Have you ever noticed that? So the trick is to leave just a little bit of the, like that. You see that? Just leave a tiny bit. And then sand it off. That way you won't get a little pull out. One thing I like about that shallow wax, the triple E and shallow wax finish, is that you can finish halfway down the surface and continue on, and you won't see the join where the two finishes meet. That's something I like about it. I'll make sure that I have all the rough off. There we go.
That small base, will that allow that to tip possibly?
That'll be about right, I'd say. Just about a third, or as they say in Ireland, a third. The agony is nearly over, folks. That's the 240. That's the 320. $400. Finally, 600. So the triple E. Oh well, can't fall any further. One of the things that amuses me is they put the triple E in a plastic container and they put the shallow wax cream in a glass container. So you want to be very careful that you don't drop the glass container on the floor.
nice bunch, and I enjoyed the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.